I think the biggest news here in New York for 2020 has to be the all-new 2020 Toyota Highlander. As you can see, they've stayed with a vehicle that is a little bit different than the rest of the competition. So Toyota is not trying to go as large as Hyundai with the Palisade or Kia with the Telluride. This is actually about the same size as the outgoing Highlander model. Up front, we have a very different look than the outgoing Highlander model. I actually think that the front end looks a little bit like a Subaru, and to be honest, a little bit more like a Subaru than Subaru's own three-row crossover, but I do think it is a very handsome look. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. This model obviously has LED headlamps on it because this is one of the top-end trims, and then we get a little different treatment going on down there than we see in the rest of the Highlander lineup. Because the Highlander has not grown in size appreciably, so this again is on the smaller end of the three-row crossover segment, we don't find the same kind of room on the inside that we do see in things like the Telluride or in the new Palisade. So an awful lot less second row and third row room versus those other options, but this is going to be an awful lot easier to park because of its more compact dimensions. In terms of overall size, this slots right in there with the GMC Acadia and of course the Honda Pilot and the Kia Sorento, those three options that are down there in the lower end of the segment along with the Highlander. We have tail lamp modules that really stick out further from the body than we see in some of the other entries in this segment, but overall a much smoother and much cleaner design out back as well. Things change a little bit under the hood. Unfortunately, we haven't actually been able to look under the hood, so we'll just have to talk about it instead. The big change is that the 2.7-liter four-cylinder base engine is now gone, making the 3.5-liter V6, good for 295 horsepower, the standard engine. With that engine, we do expect base prices to rise versus the 2019 model. Power is sent to the front wheels by default, just as before, via an 8-speed automatic transmission. But if you choose all-wheel drive, then you do actually have the choice of two different all-wheel drive systems now. One is a torque vectoring all-wheel drive system that it can actually shift power across the rear left to right, very similar to what we see in the RAV4. Now, if you want to save fuel, we do have an available hybrid system. But that hybrid system is significantly different than the last generation Highlander hybrid. Instead of using a V6, it now has a four-cylinder based hybrid system, actually quite similar to what we see in the Camry and the RAV4. It's good for 240 horsepower under this hood, which is a pretty significant bump over what we see in the RAV and in the Camry. And with that transition comes a pretty big bump in fuel economy, up to 34 miles per gallon combined, which is easily going to make this one of the most efficient vehicles in its segment. Unfortunately, the battery in this display model is disconnected, so we can't actually take a look at the cargo area, but we're told that it has grown for 2020. This now is around 16 cubic feet of overall storage space, which is definitely below the larger entries like the Atlas, the Palisade, Telluride, etc., but again, right in line with the bulk of the competition. And most Highlander shoppers really have found that their cargo area is sufficient because a lot of folks on this end of the three-row crossover segment spend most of their time with that third row folded. And there you will find a lot of cargo space if you're in that situation. One big change when it comes to overall cargo practicality is that the rear glass no longer opens separately, and that was really a feature that I loved about the outgoing Highlander model. So if you're interested in that particular feature, you might want to shop quickly because those old Highlanders are still on the dealer lot. The 2020 model just has a pretty traditional liftgate. The interior has a completely different design than the outgoing model. This definitely feels actually a little bit different than the rest of the Toyota lineup in America as well. We have this absolutely enormous 12.3-inch LCD display available. This is a touchscreen, so this is very different than what we see in the Lexus lineup that likely uses basically the same LCD element. This is also where we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control up front, and this very interesting styling going on here over to the passenger side. There are a lot of premium materials going on in this cabin, definitely a step above the outgoing Highlander model. We have soft touch plastics going on the dashboard and the lower portions of the dashboard as well. A lot of stitched materials going on there. That continues as we move over to the doors as well. We have some imitation wood grain on the doors, which I was kind of surprised by actually because we don't have that over here in this section. Here in the center console, we get a blend of old and new. We have a large storage cubby right there with 3 different USB ports. It looks like only one integrates with the system, however. 12-volt power port, pretty traditional console shifter. Cup holders there, a number of buttons back here for the drive mode, etc. And then here in the center console, it is still using a roller cover, but it looks to be an awful lot more comfortable than the outgoing model. The little hard areas here, there's still a very small one right there, but it definitely appears to be more comfortable than the previous generation model. Doesn't look like there are any USB ports in that storage area. The steering wheel also has the latest Toyota design. You can see it's a 3-spoke model, and they've moved the cruise controls over here to the steering wheel instead of a stock. Hopping into the back, this model has captain's chairs, so we have a cup holder module right there in the middle. Now that does appear to make access to the third row a little bit trickier than if that was completely left open. There are controls for the third zone in the climate control system right back there between the front seats. Air vents are well integrated into the ceiling, and this definitely has a comfortable and roomy feel to it. These seats are not quite as comfortable as the seats that we had up front, but they do have a pretty decent recline motion to them. That's one touch that I really like. But it is worth noting that these seats, although they do slide forward and backward, they don't move in a fashion that allows you to keep a child seat latched into place. Bearing in mind that the Highlander is on the smaller side of the 3-row crossover segment, definitely a lot smaller than the Telluride or Palisade, obviously the third row is a little bit more cramped. These seats are still slammed all the way to the floor, so the most comfortable way to sit back here is, with your legs crossed right like that. And headroom is definitely not as generous as some of those larger options. But I suspect that a lot of folks won't have too much of a problem back here. It is still good for kids, that sort of thing. And I'd rather have a third row and treat it as an emergency third row than not have one at all. The downside, of course, is that they still try and put a third person across this 3-row bench, and it is definitely a little tight. If I sit right back here in the middle, I would have a hard time imagining 2 other people right next to me, unless they were relatively small, children, obviously, that sort of thing. Now, children are obviously one of the reasons that we have these third-row seats back here, but we don't have any latch anchors here in the third row. If you want to get your hands on one of the new Highlanders, you will have to wait until December of 2019. That's when you'll be able to get your hands on the gasoline-only versions. If you want the hybrid, then you'll have to wait until 2020, actually. The hybrid is coming a little bit after the gasoline models. We're told February of the 2020 calendar year. We don't know exact pricing yet, but expect this to stay pretty much in line with the V6 versions of the Highlander. So expect a bit of a price bump for 2020, because the outgoing model again used that older 2.7-liter 4-cylinder engine, and under this hood, we only find the V6 engine in the gasoline models. If you bump up to the hybrid trim, then we do get that new 4-cylinder hybrid system if you do want the greater efficiency that it provides. In the meantime, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. We will have a full video review and a first look video on this just as soon as we can get our hands on one, probably closer to the end of the 2019 calendar year. In the meantime, go ahead and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and of course check out the rest of our videos from here in New York. I'll see you later.